For our documentary project, we decided to go with a museum, and we decided on the Museum of Sex in New York City.
We expected this to be a breeze, issues of gender and sexual orientation for our viewing pleasure, in the most innocent sense, of course.
Since the museum tackles such a forward-thinking and progressive topic, we expected the rest of the museum to follow in that direction. As you will soon find out, we were sadly mistaken.
Let's start with what we thought we'd find. Trigger warning, lots of naked people and sex coming. Found the website, artistically presented for prospective visitors, to be, well, less than informative.
We found the Board of Administrators.
All white people.
All rich white people.
The list of advisors is evenly mixed with male and female, most over the age of 60.
Many of them have PhDs, including the former porn star turned activist. Most of them are currently professors in colleges around the country.
Putting race aside, I think this led us to believe that we'd run into a museum thriving with cultural diversity because, college teaches you the importance of that, right?
Both Alexa and I reached out separately to try and contact someone about our visit. Can we take photographs? If not, can we have media passes? But alas, no one responded to either of us.
So we did it anyway. I brought my camera, Kayla had her phone. But if it was so difficult to answer a simple question regarding the use of a camera, how are we going to get the information on the museum as an organization that we needed?
We decided to go in with somewhat of a blind eye and take things as they come. After taking the train for about an hour, we thankfully only had a 10-minute walk to the museum.
So much waited beyond the doors. What would we experience? What people would want to talk to us? How many exhibits would we find? And what kind of knowledge would we embrace while surrounded by dildos and nipple clamps?
We tried to keep an open mind, to say the least.
In regards to the issues of gender and sexual orientation, we figured New York, freedom of expression. The staff, as well as the exhibits, would be diverse and open to discussing and elaborating on those issues.
Issues of race were apparent in the presentation of the advisors on the website, and in the exhibit previews on the website as well. We didn't think we'd run into issues of ability, disability, since the museum should be required to follow ADA guidelines, and finally, issues of socioeconomic class.
I'm broke as hell, and this museum is like $20. So we, as college students, thought it'd be interesting to see the prices of the gift shop treasures.
We were thrust into a wonderland of sex toys and scandalous clothing. The store was well taken care of and very clean. It was obvious that the museum took a lot of pride in their store. After looking around and laughing at some of the obscene objects, we decided to look at the price tags.
It was frickin' expensive, man. One condom, $2.50. A perverse birthday card, $6. And don't even get me started on the vibrators. This one is worth more than my college education, probably.
All of the employees scattered around the store were stone cold, barely cracking smiles. Definitely not a friendly vibe right off the bat.
Yeah, they clearly didn't want to be there.
We made our way through the store and into a back room where we were to buy our tickets.
We walked up to the cashier after waiting on a 2-minute line, and were faced with the friendliest person in the museum. This cashier was bubbly and outgoing, probably because she was taking our money.
The full price of the ticket was $19. If you were a student, though, it was $17. But after tax, it was almost $20. After you purchase your ticket, the cashier asks if you would like to go in the Titty Bounce House for $3 extra.
So tempting. Both of us declined, being the broke college students that we are. We were both instantly appalled by how much these tickets were, realizing they were more than a round-trip train ticket to Montclair.
Other museums, the kind that encourage education and growth, run off of donations. You can pay the suggested $10 admission or just throw them a $5 and head in.
Yeah, not here. Let's break it down now.
We're going to separate into categories, starting with gender and sexual orientation.
We'll talk about what you will find there as a visitor and what we expected of the organization itself.
Both genders were widely represented in an equal way. Throughout the store and the museum, males and females were depicted in various roles, one not lesser than the other.
On the board of advisors, there are 7 women and 4 men, so it makes sense that the diversity of genders on the board transferred over into the exhibits.
We may have even seen more female employees than male, although there weren't many employees around in general, but we'll get there.
Representation of transgender sexuality was incorporated as well.
This is pretty much an artificial vag. It works, even allowing its user to pee using the proper parts.
Available in male, female, and, quote, custom genders.
Even the bathrooms made a statement about gender. On to sexual orientation. This was another category that was widely represented. In the human and even the animal exhibit, heterosexual and homosexual relationships were both portrayed.
Not only did they portray both sexualities, but they portrayed them in a positive light.
There was no question about the views of the museum and people in charge about their LGBTQ thoughts. In this category, the museum seemed very progressive and forward-thinking.
As for the rest of the categories, unfortunately, the results were not as positive.
So now we are beginning to discuss the not-so-good topics. Let's talk about race.
One of the first things we noticed before even entering the museum was during our research online. The website posts pictures of every person on the board, and guess what? They're all white.
So right off the bat, we knew something would probably seem off in the museum. We entered the museum to the store that was filled with books and models on packaging. What did they all have in common? They were all white.
It was hard not to notice, and we quickly knew that this would be important for us to discuss.
In the first exhibit, there was one black Barbie doll amongst a series of whitewashed sex toys and magazines.
But we're not just talking black and white. There was an overall lack of racial and ethnic representation in the first exhibit we walked through. We kept walking through, making sure to keep an eye out for other races and ethnicities, as it became a Where's Waldo kind of game for us.
We eventually found a few other pictures that featured black people, but what they were showing was even worse than them not being shown at all.
These photos are by Thornton Dial. His work is influenced by the storytelling traditions of slavery.
Although these photos may not read as slavery, it just seems a bit ironic that they are one of the very few images of people of color in the museum.
There was this, explaining how interracial pornography was considered, quote, sexually ravenous and on occasion sexually dangerous. While this is a historical, factual statement, it was one of the few that mentioned people of color.
No positivity whatsoever.
Alas, during our entire, maybe 30-minute visit, we only came across less than a dozen people of color in the exhibits, with most being negative.
The staff and visitors were racially and ethnically diverse, though.
And photos of the Titty Bounce House tell us that it also has bouncy boobs of all different colors.
On to class.
It's more important that we talk about the fact that this museum is a ploy. It's not a museum, it's a sex shop.
The main entrance of the museum on Fifth Ave is the door to their souvenir shop. As we mentioned, it's expensive. Really expensive. It even sells a 24-karat gold vibrator.
It's almost as if the museum is part of your shopping experience and not the other way around. You pay to look at pictures and some statues of animals getting it on. The education value is there, yeah, but quite honestly, nothing a Google search couldn't pull up.
Let's talk about this guy, shall we? Daniel Gluck, the founder of the Museum of Sex, has a ton of money. He's a pretty rich guy.
On Glassdoor.com, an employee review site, he was bashed consistently. Employees reviewed the museum as, quote, a sandbox for a rich boy to play in, end quote. One user wrote, quote, the out-of-touch owner, founder, CEO comes from money and uses this funded by daddy operation to help pay for his other fledgling ventures.
Out of the 11 reviews on the website, 8 were negative, reflecting on Gluck and on the organization of his establishment. Many citing his terrible leadership skills and borderline abusive verbiage towards his employees.
We had this instilled in our heads before going to the museum and thus expected to experience a money-hungry establishment, which is exactly what we got. But we did a little research and turns out that wasn't always the plan.
According to articles on Entrepreneur.com and CTPost.com, Gluck planned on the museum being a non-profit, but was met by the New York Board of Regents to change his angle. If he wanted to use the term museum, he had to charge admission.
Other organizations, including the Catholic League for Religious and Civil Rights, gave Gluck a hard time, but eventually he opened his doors.
So it wasn't always a plan for money. Our opinions aren't any different. For $20, it's still a sex shop with a museum in back.
The bigger problem was the employees' attitudes expressed online. We stress online because, well, we really couldn't get in touch with anyone else.
Our emails must have been overlooked because we still never heard back from the PR team. The Glassdoor reviews were powerfully negative, all of which highlighted the fact that they worked under a rich, spoiled man.
Judging by the miserable expressions on the employees' faces at the museum, we're pretty sure their attitudes weren't just because of a bad day. The majority were not very warm and welcoming or helpful by any means. They barely answered our questions about where the bathrooms were, much less about how they liked working there. Speaking of bathrooms, they were on the bottom floor, which leads us to disability. This was one that surprised us. After we went through the entire museum, which is 3 floors connected by narrow, steep staircases, we were about to leave when we came to the realization that we didn't see an elevator.
Now that's crazy, right? No elevator? What about the people who are in wheelchairs or people that just have bad knees? When we thought about it, there weren't even ramps for wheelchairs to go down.
Now, to be clear, there could have been an elevator tucked away in an office somewhere, but as for the public, we didn't see a single one.
It would have been hard to miss since the exhibits were small anyway, but there were clearly no elevator doors in the exhibits. Terrible, right?
On top of no elevators, guess what? If you're blind or deaf, this museum is not for you. There's no braille, and the only listening device was a pair of headphones attached to a graphic novel piece in the exhibit.
No ramps, no braille, no elevator, no hearing aids. So, if you have any sort of disability, this museum is not your friend.
We even asked one of the employees if they provided hearing aids if needed, and she just said no and shook her head.
The rooms were darkly lit, and some of the writing was almost microscopic on the walls. Clearly, the museum did not cater to people with bad eyesight either.
So, what about mental disabilities? Well, this is a little different story.
What we could find regarding mental illness came from reading the plaques beside the pictures. A couple of the artists we read about were diagnosed schizophrenics, and the museum did not try to hide it.
The museum did not try to cover up any talk of mental illness and even alluded to the fact that it helped some of the artists become so successful.
So, what can we conclude from all of this?
Well, I guess it's easy to say that since its launch in 2002, the Museum of Sex has become a money-hungry organization with a bunch of colorblind, rich white people, with a leader creating a brand instead of an experience.
Unfortunately, I agree. I was completely disappointed by this museum and had such higher standards for it.
With a topic as progressive as openly discussing sex, we had hoped that the rest of the museum would follow through with the forward thinking.
As you can see, we were sadly mistaken. For the most part, the museum's exhibits weren't inclusive.
And really, we wish we could tell you more about the Museum of Sex as an organization, but no one seems to want to talk about it or provide any further information than what is given on the website.
Our extensive online research even proved to be disappointing, as the few sources listed in here were the only ones that had any real organizational content.
But if you're in New York with $20 to spare and want a good novelty experience, go. Enjoy yourself. It'll be a fun way to spend $20 for 10 minutes of your time. While you're at it, spend the extra $3 and go in the Titty Bounce house. Let us know how it is. Don't forget to stock up on your favorite lube and character condoms. It's a one-stop shop, really.
Yeah, it's not entirely useless. If you're in a wheelchair, you could just have someone carry you around. They might offer that if you ask nicely. Hearing impaired? You don't get the full experience, but you get most of it. Visually impaired? Well, at least you can hear the commentary of the people around you since they don't offer audio devices or braille.
Don't waste your money. Tumblr works just as well as this place.
Thanks for indulging in this. We hope we saved you a few bucks.